Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, your RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate the continued support. Our vlog is still up if you guys want to check that out. Our episode that we did live in person is also up as well. So continue to run those up. Those have been doing very well. And we know that news, events, and obviously games have slowed down. But that doesn't mean we're going to be slowing down anytime soon. So before we get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the OBT Podcast. Um, and yeah, so like these episodes are kind of just gonna follow the same format as the previous two. We're just gonna go team by team, and we're doing it really by division right now. So we're gonna continue with. I think this is the Pacific Division. So we already covered the Suns and the Warriors, and now we're moving into the Lakers. And luckily, we have a resident Lakers fan here to kind of walk us through, their somewhat tumultuous season. It started off kind of rocky, and then they definitely pulled it around the trade deadline, turned it around, and became a decent seed, and then they got to the Western Conference Finals. So that's kind of been that was their roadmap this season. Obviously, I skipped over a bunch of things that happened and transpired. But yeah, you want to kick this thing off and tell us how the season went for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, obviously, it kind of starts, I guess, a couple seasons ago, right, where
Hmm.
they after they lost to the Suns in that first round matchup, right, they kind of decided to pivot away from the rosters that they had had before, which worked, and decided to move towards like a third star
Yeah.
roster. But now, when they first got AD, they were kind of planning to put together a third star, right? They were trying to go after Kawhi, and that ended up obviously not working.
Yep.
So then they pivoted and made another roster, right, where it was LeBron, AD, and role players, and they ended up winning a title. Right then, the following year they shake the roster up somewhat, right, sending out some guys and bringing in others. And they were good, and then they got hurt, and then like I mentioned, they lost in the first round, and then they pivoted. They got Russell Westbrook, which was a trade at the time most Laker fans didn't like, because they felt like it wasn't a good fit. It
Right.
didn't have to do with Westbrook like himself completely, but also just like it was. Most people thought like you can't put a guy who needs the ball, who's not a great floor spacer or even really like a great defender either. You can't have a guy like that next to LeBron. I know those guys, were pretty tight, when they were doing that trade. And they probably thought, we're smart guys, we can figure it out, and it just didn't work. And it wasn't just that, but also because of that trade, they were really limited with the types of players they could put, alongside those guys. So it was a lot of minimum contract guys, kind of like what the Suns were doing, but even worse.
Yeah, it
Um,
was rough.
yeah, because the guys that they got on the minimum were just, a lot of those guys were older players that were kind of, it was like a year or two too late, right? It was guys like DeAndre Jordan, Dwight Howard,
Hmm.
Rondo. Melo was fine, right? But then, Ariza, like a lot of the guys that were on that roster aren't even on a team right now
Right.
for the most part, right? There were like a few bright spots, like Malik Monk, but you know, not a whole lot, right? And
Right.
then last year, we know what happened, right? Another offseason, right? That was kind of like, you know, for the most part, there was a situation where everybody was trying to figure out what they were going to do, what trade were they going to do. Everybody talked about the Indiana trade, and it didn't happen, right? We ended up going into the season with Westbrook on the roster. Predictably, it didn't really go well, right?
Yeah.
Again, started off 2-10. You had again a few guys that were bright spots, but not much, right? A team that was very small, started three guards, and couldn't really shoot that well. Um, right? So they were kind of just basically like I think just kind of trying to hold it together as much as they could until there was a trade available.
Sure.
Then they make that trade at the deadline, right, where they bring in D'Angelo Russell, Malik Beasley, Mo Bamba, Jared Vanderbilt. The Rui trade I think was done a few weeks before. But still, right? They completely overhauled the roster and then made that Western Conference Finals run, right, where they close the regular season out strong, go to the playoffs, get swept by Denver, but still the season ended on a much higher note than you would have expected.
Yeah.
So, now this offseason is kind of intriguing just because, unlike previous off seasons, this offseason was relatively normal. Like to steal a quote from SpongeBob, I guess.
Yeah.
Um,
Pretty
you
much.
know,
I'm normal.
yeah, pretty normal offseason where, you take a team that was pretty good and then you just kind of just add on to it, right? Like some guys, are gone, right? Like Dennis Schroeder's gone, and a few others, right? But like then they replace some of those guys. So, we'll get into the roster, I guess. So obviously we'll start with the starting five, presumed starting five. I'm not exactly sure because there's still a little bit of wiggle room.
And
Um,
there's been rumors of some position battles as well.
Exactly, and there's been rumors of position battles as well, but, obviously you have, your backcourt with D'Angelo Russell and Austin Reeves, right? We know what they are, we know what they can do, right? Those are 2 skill guards that are, more so offensive-minded guys. They can shoot,
Yes, sir.
they can handle the ball, they can pass relatively well, um, and then, it's kinda interesting just because those guards are very different from the types of guards that LeBron and AD were initially playing with when they first played together, but part of that is also just the evolution of those 2 guys where now that they're a little bit older, right, they're not quite the same guys,
Right.
on every given night in the regular season, so you need other guys that can kinda help, them, just make it easier for them, and that's what you want. So those 2 guys I think are pretty well equipped to handle that, especially, for D'Angelo Russell in the regular season, he can help you out a lot.
Yeah.
And then after that, right? Obviously we know what LeBron and AD can do. And so that other forward spot is where it gets kind of interesting. So last year, right, Vanderbilt was the guy who was the starter, post trade deadline for the most part. And he could still be the starter, right? And he has, he brings some skills to the table, mainly more so defensively. And he can hustle and he's got length. Um, you
Can
know,
rebound.
yeah, exactly. Can rebound. Listed at 6'8". Apparently, Phil Handy, their trainer, said he's grown a couple inches. I don't know if that's actually like
Yeah.
legit. Because we've heard that sometimes from guys. I mean, I know he's relatively young. I think he's like 23, 24.
Yeah.
And guys, in the NBA, and or just in general, we've seen people sometimes grow, past like 23. So I think
Right.
usually like it kind of ends maybe around 25, but still, regardless, right? His game's probably not going to be that different. Um, right? But the thing is that interestingly enough, now, right, we know Rui Hachimura was, re-signed, to a new contract, right? 3-year, I believe, $51 million deal.
Yep.
But now he's making more money annually. So it's very possible that he could now kind of slide into that
I
starting,
think he will.
yeah, starting spot, I think too, because just in general, you're not usually gonna pay a guy that money. If he's, just gonna mainly come off the bench.
And he's
But it is
improved
kind
a lot too.
Exactly. So I think, yeah, and that's kind of the interesting thing because those 2 guys are very different in terms of what they provide. Right, Rui's more of an offensive-minded skill player, right, whereas Vanderbilt's more of like a defensive, minded player, not
Right.
quite as skilled. Also, like Vanderbilt defensively is probably better, on like wings, but more so like ball handling wings. Not guys that are more one-on-one players, not so much like off-ball players. Whereas
Sure.
Rui's probably better like guarding like bigger forwards,
Yeah.
sort of, right? Not quite as much wing because he's a little bit slower but very strong,
Right.
with long arms. So that's kind of interesting. Either way, whoever starts, right? Obviously, you have some shooting concerns, right? Because neither guy's like a great outside shooter. Rui has improved, but his playoff percentage, he shot like almost 50% from three in the playoffs. That's a very high percentage, right?
Phenomenal.
Yeah, exactly. That's not a percentage that is sustainable over the course, of an entire season. So, um, and he's not like a bad 3-point shooter, right? But like, he's not like an elite 3-point shooter. So that's kind of something to look to. Does he progress with that 3-point shot?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so assuming that Rui starts, right, then that's your starting five, right? So then, off the bench, right, this is where it gets kind of interesting, right? For that backup guard spot, which we didn't expect at all. We kind of thought that Schroeder might be back.
Yeah,
Just
we really did.
yeah, we didn't even think that Vincent was going to be, a guy,
We didn't even know he was on the radar.
yeah, for the Lakers, yeah. But he's going to be the back. I would imagine, and I know they've mentioned positional battles, but he's, I think for now going to be the backup point
Yeah.
guard. And he brings an interesting skill set. Just because he can kind of operate as like a secondary, tertiary guy, handling the ball, pick and roll. He can shoot off ball. Sometimes he can get a little bit creative. And he competes defensively, right? He's defensively. Schroeder is probably like a little bit better just because he's faster. But, Vincent is stronger. So, defensively, it's probably not going to be that different,
Right.
aside from his ability to like chase as fast is, again, not quite as well as shooters, but still.
He's a
It's
harasser though. Like,
exactly. It's the
yeah,
offense where you have, more differences because Vincent's, when his shot is falling, he's the superior offensive player just because he's
absolutely.
a better shooter.
Hmm.
He didn't shoot that great in the regular season from three. It was only like 33, 34%, right? And then come playoff time, it was basically like 40%.
Yeah, he stepped up
Um,
big.
Exactly, and catch and shoot 3-point percentage, right? Similar percentage as well, and that's what you want, right? You want guys that can, catch and shoot, and so ideally he should be a pretty good fit alongside, LeBron and AD, just because again, he can do more things other than just kind of stand around. and he can defend fine.
Yeah.
Um, and then after that, you look at that 2-2-3 spot, we saw Max Christie last year as a rookie, and he played a little bit, but more so when the team wasn't very good, which makes sense, right? Like, like usually like younger guys are more likely to play on bad teams, in terms of big minutes.
Hmm.
And then once you get more talent, they're not going to play as much. But, you know, it's going to be interesting because he's going to be a guy that I think they're going to kind of need, to step up because, he's the only, guard ish type of player that can kind of play both the 2 and 3, and defend and shoot relatively well, right? Because Reeves, at times when they did the 3 guard lineups, he'd play the 3, but he's more like a guard, right? Like he's not really like a 2-3.
Yeah.
Um, but he, again, you can kind of get away with certain things when you have LeBron and AD, but still, right? Christie can probably play small forward better than
I think so
Austin.
too.
Yeah,
Especially
Austin.
from what we saw in the summer league. Like, it
Yeah,
looks like, he's definitely grown into his own and he can
yeah,
easily
exactly.
run the 2 or the 3.
Yeah, he's put on some more, weight in terms of strength, right? So that's a good thing. And like you mentioned, he's got more on ball skills as well, which he won't have to do as much, I don't think, playing next to LeBron and AD. But still,
Yeah.
it's nice to kind of be able to go to that. But he's a guy that I think is going to be kind of important. Because again, if he doesn't work, you don't really have another guy like that on the roster. So
Exactly.
I think they're banking on, that he's, put in the work this offseason to be a rotational guy for them. Um, and then after that, right, like, the other guards I didn't mention, like Maxwell Lewis, and Jalen Hood Scafino, because I don't think they're gonna play much for the Lakers during the regular season because they're rookies, right? And
You don't think
again,
Scapino's going to play a lot?
not unless like there's a lot of injuries.
I
Because I
think
mean,
he'll
like,
play a lot though. I don't know.
I,
That might just be me.
yeah, because the only reason why, like, is just because again, you have Russell, you have Vincent, you have Reeves, and I
I
think
get it.
Chris will get the early opportunity over. Now, again, if he impresses, right, then he'll get more opportunities. It's just like in a playoff environment, like if it's Game 7, of like the Western Conference Finals, are they going to go to him a lot? Like,
It
probably not.
depends. It depends on, how his regular season goes, but I think he'll play a decent amount in the regular
Yeah,
season. I don't
I
know.
think he'll get opportunities. You
Sure.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I don't think he'll be like a consistent part of the rotation unless he's really, really, really good.
Mhm.
But like he wasn't like a guy that I expect to get minutes only
Okay.
because he's a rookie. But he
Okay.
could if he
Yeah.
plays well. And then after that, you go to the other wings on the roster, right? Torian Prince, right? That's a guy that they signed with that biannual exception. Pretty solid, right? 6'7", 6'8" ish forward, right? Kind of like a floor spacing, forward, right? He can shoot relatively well. Defensively, he's okay, not great, but again, he's fine. The only issue he's not a great, like, he's not really a great rebounder. So, like, if he
Right.
goes super small, I think that's probably going to be one issue, with the team, unless, maybe they make some changes. But either way, I think that's still a quality signing because, again, like, he's basically you're probably swapping out, I guess, Lonnie Walker minutes with Torian Prince minutes, right? Kind of. I mean, it's not the same position, but
Sure. I
he'll
get what
bring,
you're saying though.
yeah, he brings a different skill set to the table just because he's bigger. He's a better shooter. But Walker was good for them in different points. But when we talk about that, right? Like you swap out Schroeder with Vincent, and then you swap out, Walker, I guess, kind of in a way with Prince. And then after that, you look at Cam Reddish, right? That's kind of one of their minimum signings that they, the young guy that you take a chance on, kind of like Bol for Phoenix.
Big
Uh,
opportunity for him.
yeah, exactly. It's a big opportunity for him. We know he's been tied to the Lakers for like a few years at this
Yeah.
point.
It
Yeah, I
seemed like
think.
every year, like in the
Yeah,
offseason, it was like they're chasing after Cam Reddish.
yeah, exactly. And they finally got him on a minimum contract. Young player came in, with a decent amount of hype.
A lot.
Especially from his peers, because I think a lot of the rookies in that class thought like, he was gonna be like the best player in the class, like,
He was phenomenal in high school and pretty good at Duke.
yeah, exactly. It just hasn't panned out so far in the NBA. But again, we've seen in the past the Lakers take chances on some of those type of guys, right? Like, again, Malik Monk, right, who didn't work out in Charlotte, comes to LA, plays great, and then continues to find success elsewhere. Same with Lonnie Walker, right? Didn't pan out for the Spurs. Then he comes to LA, plays relatively well, and then again succeed. Gets another opportunity to succeed elsewhere. So
Yeah.
again, this is going to be a pretty big opportunity for him. Because again, if he can actually show that he can contribute, right? He's got some pretty good physical tools. He's a good athlete. He's got long arms. Even though he's like came in as a wing, I feel like he's probably more so like a guard than a wing, just
I
because.
I yeah, sorry to cut you off, but
Yeah,
like I feel like he reminds me
big
of like
guard.
Paul George, like when he was really raw, when he first came into the league in
Yeah,
Indiana, something along those lines where he's like
right.
a not oversized two guard, but a taller
Yeah,
two guard. You know what I
a
mean?
big guard more so than a wing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
But like early Paul George, not the
exactly.
Paul George that we know today.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's what I'm thinking. If he can carve out that role. Again, I don't know if he will, because again, he hasn't panned out yet. But
Right.
again, you'd think, he's playing with more talent. And again, he's on a minimum contract. So he kind of has a lot, to lose here, because
Yeah.
again, if it doesn't pan out in LA, it might be kind of hard for him, to get
I think
another
this
gig
is his
elsewhere.
last stop if he doesn't, do that well. But we're
Yeah.
rooting for him.
Yeah, exactly. So then you move on. I already mentioned Vanderbilt, and it's kind of an interesting thing with him as well, because again, he was a starter last year. But again, with Rui getting that new contract, he's probably going to come off the bench, and you
I think
almost
he
kind of
will.
wonder if he's going to turn into a more situational guy now, where his minutes might fluctuate a lot more. And because they already kind of did, like as the season went on, right? Because as they got deeper into the playoffs, he wasn't playing as much. And then eventually wasn't even really starting.
Right.
Um, or closing games for that matter. So, I mean, so it's going to be interesting to see because again, another young guy. So, if he can work on some of those aspects of his game, but regardless, like in the regular season, you need those type of guys, to
Absolutely.
help you out, to do the dirty work, to defend and rebound.
Yep.
Um, so either way, like, we're right now, we're kind of like just, getting into the basics of the roster.
Mm-hmm.
Then obviously we already talked about AD, so we don't need to say, anything about LeBron or AD because we
Right.
already know their games and we know what they're going to do.
Yes.
It's just a matter of, for LeBron, what does he look like in year 21 going into, age 39, right? Does he take
Yes.
somewhat of a step back? Is he basically the same? Does he look better than he was before he hurt his foot? But other than that, right, like we know their games. So we don't have to talk as much about them.
Right.
Um, then we get into the big man situation, right? And that's Jackson
This is a
Hayes,
big
right? Who
deal.
right now is their only real backup center. That's another guy, right? Another young guy for the minimum was the center for New Orleans. And then after they got some other guys, right? He was coming off the bench, playing a little out of position where he was playing kind of as a power forward at
Yeah.
points. And then New Orleans kind of just let him go. So again, it's kind of like with the Reddish thing. You're always kind of skeptical about guys, that get cut, from rosters as young players and, they can only get a minimum contract elsewhere. But it's going to be a kind of a prove it scenario for him as well.
Absolutely.
Um, Again, another guy where the physical gifts, clearly are there. He's a very good athlete, relatively mobile, but he's also pretty thin. Because I know like people have kind of like looked at him sort of like as a JaVale McGee, Dwight Howard esque center. He's a little more like JaVale just because he's not quite as like big. I mean,
Yes. I agree with
JaVale
the
is not
JaVale.
skinny, but Dwight was more like the bruising center
Yeah,
for
he was a big
here.
boy.
Yeah, exactly. Hayes is not really a bruiser. He's more like, just like a physical athlete guy, right?
Right.
Like in terms of he's just more of an athlete. But he's very raw. So kind of the question there is, can Darvin Ham kind of figure out some stuff, with him, in terms of like how do they use him defensively? Because his defense has kind of dropped off.
He used to be
Since
a
he
really good
first
defender.
yeah, like and it's dropped off. And like, again, like that kind of matters as well in terms of the role, right? Like, I think last year, right? Like, he was, they were using him in different ways, and again, like that happens when because they had a lot of bigs on New Orleans, right? It was like Valanciunas,
Mm-hmm.
Larry Nance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hernan Gomez. I mean, and then like that doesn't even mention, don't even mention like Zion and some of the other
Right.
guys. So like a lot of bigs. So again, it's kind of a situation where you hope it works. Like I said, I'm skeptical that he can be your only backup center, but um, again, that's all we have right now, right? So and then obviously, after that, they have 13 guys right now, so they're gonna have to sign a 14th guy before training camp. I think the 15th roster spot they'll probably just leave and not sign anybody and probably like, use that like maybe either like during the buyout or like if somebody else like, just pops up
Right.
like a trade or something like that. But that's kind of what I'm thinking. And obviously, we've heard some of the rumors about like, some of the bigs out on the market, right? Like we know that like they're interested in like a Christian Wood. We've also heard Biombo.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, like it's not really that many other
It's
guys
dry.
left.
It's really dry.
After that, like Tristan Thompson, I guess was there last year, but he could easily just be like the 15th roster spot guy.
Yep.
Or obviously you could always bring back Wenyon Gabriel. Um, So I guess like, before we get into like, the other aspects, like in
Sure.
terms of like the strengths and weaknesses, I guess like, just kind of like as a positive, like of the centers that have been mentioned, like which one do you think like, is the most intriguing to you? Um,
So are we talking between Biombo and basically Christian Wood here?
yeah, so I guess like
Okay.
Wood, Biombo, and then after that, like bring back Wenyan Gabriel or bring
Okay.
back Tristan Thompson, right? So I guess like those, because I don't think there's like off the top of my head that many other options out there that people
Yeah.
have mentioned.
Offensively, I would love to see, the Lakers take a gamble on Christian Wood, but,
Hmm.
we even talked about it last episode. It seems like they really don't want him, and not necessarily the management, but the players, and I think the quote was there's two players with heavy sway on the
Yeah,
roster, heavy
I think it was one.
influence. Okay, it
It
was
was
one
one,
one player with heavy, influence on the roster that doesn't want him there. So that basically signals, LeBron or AD doesn't want, you know,
or maybe D'Lo.
yeah, I doubt D'Lo has any sway, but yeah, I think LeBron probably doesn't want Christian Wood there just because he's probably heard the rumblings, of him not being the most savory player in the locker room. So I'd have to probably go with Biombo, and I think Biombo kind of fits that archetype. Where it's like you could take a gamble on Jackson Hayes and he doesn't pan out, and then you just bring in Biombo and you have a decent rim protector. I mean, Biombo is not a great offensive player. That's the problem.
No,
Um, I feel like Jackson Hayes is a little bit better offensively for sure. He can catch lobs. He's freaky athletic. It's kind of
Paul.
scary. Exactly, taller. But like you said, if the problem is Jackson Hayes is such a big question mark that they do need to get another big. But the problem is the big market is horrible. So I'd probably just go with Biombo. I just think that's probably the best deal out there. Either Biombo or Gabriel, because I'm not gonna lie, I did like when I did see Wenyan Gabriel out there and he was giving it his all. And I know
Yeah,
you're a Gabriel fan too, so I think
yeah,
that would be interesting to see them bring back Gabriel or Biombo.
yeah, exactly. Like if they bring in Christian Wood, like like I'm fine with it. Again, it's just a matter of like like what do they need the most,
Right,
right? Because I don't feel like they need like offense
no,
from the center spot because you already have a decent amount of offense from the other guys.
you're right.
But again, like again, they always seem to like kind of do the exact opposite of what everybody thinks they're gonna do.
And
So, or
sometimes it
not even,
works.
yeah, exactly. Or sometimes they do what nobody thinks they're gonna do, right? Because I don't think D'Angelo Russell was a name that was even thought of as a target for them like during the trade deadline last season. I know you kind of brought him up like as sort of like it's like a random potential guy that they could
Yeah,
grab.
I don't know. I just
Um,
honestly pulled that out of nowhere. Like
yeah,
I wasn't
but
really
like
that had no there were no
right,
rumors about that. I was just saying that.
no,
I don't know why.
exactly. Yeah, so that's the thing. So like you know again, because again, like at this point in the offseason, there's no great options because otherwise those options would already be gone, and picked up by somebody else. But
Right.
I was just always curious because there's been a lot of debates about that, in and outside of Lakers circles, right? Because I mentioned the funny quote by one of the executives where they're like, if LeBron can get Christian Wood to buy in, then that automatically cements him as the greatest player of
Y-
all time. Which again,
Hey,
like I feel
I
like that's
mean,
somewhat of like a hyperbole. Like I don't feel like
yeah.
there's no way he could be like that, awful as a locker room guy. Like I'm not saying he'd be great, but like I feel like we've seen examples of guys that would be worse
Oh,
in the
absolutely.
locker room.
Yeah.
And I guess like yeah, so it's just I don't know. Like I said, I don't know him personally, so I'm not trying to say a whole lot about it. It's just that's just what we've heard.
But I know the
Um,
management for the Lakers, they definitely have Christian Wood on their, radar for sure. That is a
right.
rumor. So it wouldn't surprise me if they do go Christian Wood, but I think I would like Biombo there a little bit better just
Yeah.
because he brings,
Yeah.
that defensive factor for sure.
Yeah. And again, like, unlike Hayes, he's a more physical, option at that center spot. He's
Right.
just not very tall. He's like
Right.
what,
That's the
6'8",
problem. Yeah.
9?
6'8".
Yeah. Yeah. But you're not gonna be worried about like, hey, like if his minutes like, kind of get cut, is he gonna be
You're not going
upset?
to miss
I
him.
just yeah, exactly. And yeah, and again, like just he's probably not gonna be the same in terms of like a potential headache. But, but I can understand, like if somebody feels like, yeah, just go for the talent because there's nothing wrong with going for the talent.
Right.
It's just a matter of again, you have to find a way to make it work. Otherwise, it's going to be kind of a waste.
Yes. I
But we'll
agree.
see.
Yeah, I
And
agree
then after that,
100%.
obviously we know the strengths of the roster, right? The star power, LeBron and AD. That's a
Mm-hmm.
very good starting, baseline, in terms of talent. We know they're a physical roster, right? In the sense of like, LeBron and AD are big physical guys. Rui obviously is physical. Once you already have two guys, right, then the third guy, can attack a lot more mismatches. Um, And then also I think there's, the shooting is gonna be better than last year's roster just because of again the guys you brought in, right? Vincent, over Dennis Schroeder, and then Torian Prince. I think those are upgrades as a shooting, like addition, right? Max Christie, if he shot like 41 from three last year, so if he can keep that up, not that he has to shoot 41%, but if he can be a good 3-point shooter, that helps. We know D'Angelo Russell and Reeves can do that as well, and both of those guys can create and play off the ball. IQ wise, should be pretty good, and they do have a decent amount of options. Like I said, weaknesses wise, right? Like there are certain parts of the roster that are a little bit shakier, right? Just because, like, again, that the lack of, other options at that big spot would be kind of a concern, just because, again, you're worried about like the rebounding potentially, especially when AD's off the floor. You're worried about the interior defense, especially when AD's off the floor. That can be a concern. And then like, then you also have to kind of look at like, the D'Angelo Russell part of of the equation where it's like, again, he was really good for them in the regular season and then in the playoffs, started fine, right? And then, as it went, deeper and deeper, it just didn't really work out.
Yeah, it was
Um,
really bad. Like there were
yeah,
times
and
where they
it's
couldn't have him out there.
yeah, exactly. And ideally you need him out there because his skill set, if he plays well, will help you. Because, when he plays well, that takes pressure off the other guys. It's just obviously like, is that gonna change this postseason? Maybe,
Probably
but
not.
probably not. So that's kind of something that you have to look at in terms of like they do have, in terms of the strengths, which I didn't really mention as much. They do have flexibility on the roster to potentially, make some type of trade. Um, the type of contract that D'Angelo Russell got, right? It's a 2-year deal with the player option on the second year. And he also waived his no trade
Yeah,
or de facto no
de
trade
facto, yes.
clause. Yeah, exactly. Because it's a 2-year deal, and I think because it's like the early bird rights or whatever. In the previous CBA, they would get a de facto no trade clause because I think KCP had that. When he was a Laker.
Hmm.
Um, so that gives you some flexibility to potentially move him, right? Because we know, like we already know right now there were rumors about like, hey, he may not be the starter.
Yeah,
Maybe a battle at point guard. Again, I think he will be the starting point
I think
guard.
he will as
Um,
well.
because I do think they like him. It's just we all know like that there's the rumors of him being traded is not going away.
Well, his
You know,
game and his style of play has huge limitations, and you can definitely see it because the problem is
right? Like,
he's not a freak athlete. He can't
yeah,
really get to the rim, crazy. He's crafty, but he
y-
can't get to the rim, as well as some
right,
other point guards, especially for his size. It's kind of unorthodox. And then, the jump shot, if it's going in, it's going in, but if it's not going in, it might be one of his worst nights ever, and he might not even look like an NBA player. Then obviously he's a stick on defense. He does have the size advantage on people, but sometimes it just looks like he's stuck in the mud. But I don't know.
yeah,
It's like he's a hot or cold player, and that's just the reality
right.
that they have to live with. And if he's cold, you just have to take him out and hope that somebody else can play 10 times better.
Yeah, and that's kinda where you hope Gabe Vincent, can kinda work out because
Right.
if he does work out, maybe there's a world where you trade D'Angelo Russell for something else, and then he's your starting and then Vincent's your starting point guard, but,
But the problem
um
is, like, sorry, I just want to talk about D'Lo for a little bit
yeah,
longer.
sure.
Like, the thing with D'Lo is it's hard to trade him during the regular season because normally he's a pretty, decent regular season player where it's like we don't need to trade him, but like you want to start trading him in the off season when you can't, or not the off season, but the postseason when you really can't.
Right.
Like that's when
Yeah,
he looks like a tradable player, and it's like, all right, I mean, what more can you really do? So I don't know. It's
yeah,
just an interesting situation, and teams know what they get, when they pick
yeah,
him up for sure.
right, yeah, nobody's surprised at what they're gonna be getting out of D'Angelo
Right.
Russell. Um, because everybody knows what he is at this point, right? Because
Right.
again, he's also at an age where, again, he's probably not going to get better. Ideally, he's entering his prime. So at this point, he probably is what he is, right?
Right.
Like, we're again pretty good player in the regular season that fits, really well, with what they're trying to do, and because again, he can shoot well. And he can play off the ball, which I think is important when you're playing alongside LeBron.
Sure.
LeBron plays a lot more off the ball now than he used to,
Which
but
is a
still,
good thing,
ideally, like
honestly.
yeah, exactly, because it takes the pressure off of him, and it just kind of allows the offense, to kind of like flow,
And
a
everybody
little
loves
more.
his post game. It's elite. So if you put him in the post,
Yeah,
with other players that can definitely take pressure off of him, I think it's a
yeah,
great mix. It's just the problem is the consistency, not from
right,
LeBron, but from
exactly.
those guys.
Right, because we've talked about how he's, like, transitioned more into, like, kinda like a big forward,
Right.
power forward right now where he's, like, not playing on the ball quite as much even though he still does,
Yes.
right? And also, like you mentioned, posts up a lot more, play set screens and rolls a lot more, which again, like I said, you want that to take the pressure off of him because ideally, you don't want him to put a ton of, mileage, especially during the regular season because you need him for the playoffs because
Yep.
you're not worried about LeBron usually come playoff time, but you got to get there first,
Yes.
right? So obviously, if he's hobbled a lot during the regular season,
It's not
that's
gonna be pretty.
exactly right because he got hurt last year in the regular season and it carried into the playoffs, right?
You
He
could
was still
tell.
able to play
It
through it,
was nagging
but
him.
you knew, yeah, exactly. But you knew, it was that injury was bothering him.
Yeah.
So, and again, that would be the other weakness, obviously, of the roster is your two stars. They're probably going to miss time, right? They're not
Yeah,
going to
those are
play.
what my weakness is gonna be.
Yeah, exactly. They're not going to play 70, games together during the regular
Yeah.
season.
And that's their
Again, like
problem.
I said,
Like I feel like
yeah,
their strengths and weaknesses are kind of the same, which is kind of funny. Like I feel like they're one of the only teams in the league where that's the case, where it's like LeBron and AD can be your strength, but they can also be one of your weaknesses because they're liable to miss time. Or in AD's case, not to like attack him or anything, but sometimes he looks very inconsistent. Like there's times where he looks like arguably one of the better, big men in the league, and then there's times where he just doesn't show up. So
yeah,
it's just interesting to see.
right. Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of the thing, that I'm thinking of. So they got, like I said, a little bit more skilled, a little bit slower,
Yeah,
bigger in some areas, but again, there's still some flexibility. There's still some work to be done because again, they have 13 guys, so they have to add. And we didn't mention it with the Golden State thing. I guess we kind of forgot, but I think they have 13 players as well.
yeah.
So again, those two teams will have to add at least somebody before training camp
And
starts
we'll
because I think you
update you
have to.
guys too when like once,
Yeah, exactly.
those people are signed.
Right, exactly. So that's what I'm thinking.
Hmm.
So, in terms of like outlook, in terms of what they're going to be, we know what they're going to be, right? Obviously, because you have LeBron and AD, they're going to try to contend for the title.
Yeah,
And we've been covering Western Conference teams. We know that the Western Conference has gotten, you know, better, I think, over the course of this offseason, right? A lot
absolutely.
of teams have improved. I think the Lakers have improved as well. Um, Obviously, it's just the question is, can you get over the hump, right? Can you beat that, Denver boogeyman? Which is again, that's going to be tough because again, we saw, you know, in last year's playoffs where a lot of the games were relatively close. It's just in the end, Denver was kind of able to win out because again, they were just kind of able to, kind of do what they wanted to on offense and got enough stops, right, to where they were able to slow down LA, right? Because
Right.
like even in Game 4, right, they won the game right at the end, by getting that stop, with
It
Aaron
wasn't an
Gordon.
easy path for Denver. The Lakers
Right.
made it hard for them. I think in terms of like
Yeah,
you look at the
exactly.
score differentials, it was very close. Like you said, it wasn't a
Right.
cakewalk.
Exactly. And that's kind of, the thing when like, when they're talking about the over-unders, for the NBA next season. And I think the Lakers, if I look at it, the last time I saw it, I think they had them around like 47-ish wins.
Okay,
And I think that
that's
makes a
steep.
decent amount of sense because when we look at last year, I believe they were 43 and 39, seventh in the Western Conference. They'll probably win more games than they did last year because they're not going to start off 2-10.
Right.
But then you still have to factor in, like, for example, how many games are LeBron and AD going to play? Because that matters, right? Because if they play like 65-ish games together, then they're going to win more games, right? They're not
Absolutely.
going to like, yeah, exactly. But if they only play like 50 games together, right, then they're gonna lose. They're gonna lose a lot more games.
Sure.
Then you got to also factor in, how hard are they going to play, right? Because we saw during the second half of last year, they were playing, like every night, like it was a playoff game. All
Yeah.
those regular season
They were
games, but
fighting for their lives.
exactly fighting for their lives, and you're probably not going to have to do that, as much going into this season because you have more talent,
And you
going
probably have
into the
more
season.
leeway too. There's
Yeah,
more there's more of a forgiveness area where,
right.
like you said, they're probably not going to start off 2-10. We're probably going to see
Yeah,
them have a
exactly.
stronger start, which means, they have the flexibility to potentially lose more games, like,
Exactly. Yeah.
without costing them a seed or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Because again, the main thing is that like I still think, like, wins wise, like, if we're talking about standings, like, they're probably not gonna be, like, 1 or 2 because I would imagine Denver is gonna probably be number 1 as long as, Jokic and, Jamal Murray play.
Yeah.
And then after that, right, you know, maybe up for grabs, but again, I'm gonna assume LeBron and AD are probably gonna sit, at least some games. So my guess is they'll probably be like, somewhere they're gonna be a top 4 seed. They're not gonna be seventh, but it's just a matter of like, whether or not they're gonna be 1 or 2, which I don't think they'll
No,
be,
no,
or
no, no.
probably like 3 or 4, right? Which is probably more likely. Maybe like 3, just
Yeah,
because 2 is possible, but I don't think 1 is gonna be realistic because I just feel like Denver's probably just going to automatically be the number 1 seed. Because again, as long as Jokic is playing, right, they're gonna probably win most of their games during the
sure.
regular season because he doesn't need a ton of guys, to win regular season games.
And like
Um,
for me, like with the Lakers, I think, when we talk about these teams and their off seasons and especially where they're going into the next season, where they're headed for playoffs, we kind of just like, you do have to factor in injuries for sure, but we also want to use the ideal situation. So in the ideal situation, I think, they're going to be better than Memphis. They're going to be better than the Clippers. I think they're definitely going to be better than Sacramento as well. So that kind of gives them the leeway to be that third seed for sure, maybe fourth,
yeah,
like you said. I think five is stretching it a little bit just because last season they had to fight so dang hard to dig themselves out
yeah,
of the hole that they were in. So it's going to be a completely different season for them. So I think, they'll definitely be higher in the standings than last season for sure.
right, yeah, because that's how I look at it. I think they will probably be one of the top 3 teams in the Western Conference.
Right.
It's just again the question is because we know they got to the Western Conference Finals. Question is, can they get to the finals? Because that's the main thing. Because it's definitely possible. It's just not going to be easy because
Right.
again, like we mentioned with the Warriors, it's the same thing. You're going to have to beat, 2 of those 3,
Juggernauts.
teams. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one of those. Yeah, exactly. You have to beat at least 2 of those 3 teams that we mentioned, right? If you're the Lakers, you're probably going to have to beat Denver. You're probably going to have to beat Golden State and or Phoenix. And I think they can beat most of those teams. Denver, I still think is a tough matchup just because of the Jokic
There's
factor.
no there's no
And
solution to it. You can't stop him in the postseason now.
yeah,
He's gotten to that point.
exactly. Because that's the main thing is that like because defensively, we know that they can be really good. It's just the question is offensively, again, you're going to have to figure out, right? Because again, in order to beat Denver, you're still probably going to need D'Angelo Russell to be better if he's on the team. And that's the main thing, I'm kind of basing it off of the roster right now,
Right.
right? Like, if something randomly happens and they pull something out of their hat, right? And then it's an upgrade from D'Angelo Russell, then that probably changes, like that makes it easier.
Right.
Just because again, you're probably getting a guy that will be better against Denver because that's the thing, right? Like that's because again, Russell, like most guys who aren't like star players, like oftentimes are probably going to look worse in the playoffs than they will in the regular season. Not everybody, right? But like the consistency is just going to be different, right? Because again, when you get to the playoffs, there's a certain level of skill that you need to have to succeed in the playoffs, right? And because again, we've seen even guys that are star level players like look worse in the playoffs, like a James Harden, right? Again, he's a guy that has the cachet of being at one point he was considered a superstar, and even when he was a superstar, right, he was kind of known for being relatively inconsistent guy in the postseason. But again, kind of a similar thing where he's not like like a crazy athlete. Even though Harden at one point was a decent athlete.
Sure.
Because because I remember some of the old Houston plays where like he had the play I think against Golden State in the conference finals when Chris Paul was there, right, where he had like the dunk on Draymond,
Yeah.
where
He used to
like the
get up
old thing you
there.
would do, yeah, you would do like the nosebleed thing where you would kind of like, yeah, exactly, like you remember that.
Yeah, and
Um,
he would actually throw down like some pretty not like, high flying tomahawks, but some pretty
right.
strong tomahawks. Now you can clearly see he's slowed down for sure.
Yeah. So that's the main thing, when we're talking about the Lakers. Like it's probably kind of a Warriors thing where like I feel better about them than Golden State in terms of like,
I agree.
you know, can they get to the finals? Yeah.
They did
Like,
more.
but I don't think yeah, exactly. And can they win the title? Yeah, if they can get to the finals, yeah. I don't think they're the favorites in the Western Conference
Hmm.
because I just feel like even with Denver losing, the key guys, right? I feel like most people will go into the season with Denver as the favorites just because they just came off of a title, right?
Yes.
Their guys are, entering their prime. So there's a world where like, maybe Jokic and Murray are like even better than they were last year, for sure. Or just any of the other guys in general, right? Because again, it's a team that is young, but unlike say Memphis, where their guys are like really young, right? The Denver guys are a little bit older. Where like I said, Jokic and Murray are at an age now where Jokic is what 28 or so, so he's basically in his prime, entering
Right.
his prime. whereas like with the Memphis guys, they're younger, right? So they're in a different spot, right? Same with like
Absolutely.
some of those other young teams. So that's kind of how I feel about it. We're like, I think Denver is still the favorite, probably. But I think, but again, I think the Lakers can beat any of those other teams, like in terms of like Golden State, Phoenix. I just need to see like what it looks like against Denver, because again, like you mentioned, it was competitive, and the Lakers did make improvements. But I do think that they're definitely a top three team in the Western Conference, and like
Yes, I
they
agree.
can match up pretty well against most of these teams.
I agree. I think, they're I think not I'm not going to say miles ahead of Golden State, but especially after what they've done with their roster and the guys that they brought in, I think, it does give them the edge over Golden State and a lot of other teams in the West. If we had to rank them, then I definitely think they're a top team now. It's a far cry from what we saw last season. I
Yeah,
think this
exactly.
roster
Because
is
last
10
year,
times better.
right, yeah, because going into last year, no serious person had them as a contender, right?
Yeah,
There were a lot of people that even have them as a playoff team.
right.
I think most people were like, probably play-in team at best.
Yeah, that's what I
Um,
thought,
and they were a
especially
play-in
before the
team.
Russ thing.
Yeah, exactly, especially before the trade, right? So now they're back in that contender status. It's just a
Easily.
matter of, yeah, it's just a matter of, again, what is the health? Just like Phoenix, what is the health of their stars? Um, like, because again, if they miss an extended amount of time, that's a problem.
Yep.
I think they're set up in a way where one of those guys can miss time, and they'll probably still be able to get some wins because they have, a decent amount of depth.
I think Braun is
Um,
the one who can miss time,
yeah,
honestly.
I think Braun is the one who can miss more time just because, again, like you have other options at the forward spot, like Rui,
Yes.
who can step in and kind of like, just be like the de facto like second, third offense. Well,
Exactly.
maybe not, but you know what I mean? Like,
I know what you mean,
he
yes.
yeah, he can put up, he can put up some numbers, for LeBron while he's out. He's not going to be LeBron, but you have some more options at that forward spot where right now, again, if AD misses time, it's basically Jackson Hayes,
Yeah,
who's the next guy up, unless you put, LeBron at center again, which I just don't think you want to
he
do
can't.
that.
Yeah,
Um,
it's not worth it.
yeah, exactly. So that's kind of, where I'm looking at it at this point, where, like I said, I feel like they are one of the top three teams. It's just a matter of, again, will they be able to overcome Denver? We'll just have to see. Because, again,
Yeah,
like, that's kind of the cool thing about the NBA season, when we're going into it, is because we know a lot of teams, especially in the Western Conference, have improved. Um, but it is kind of funny, right? Because Denver was not looked at now the same way that they were looked at a year ago, right? Like there were people who were high on Denver, but they were not looked at as like a favorite, I don't think.
right.
But now, like it's going to be interesting because now that they've arrived as a championship team, where they're coming off a championship, they're going to have obviously much higher expectations now, but they've
Absolutely.
already won, so and they have that advantage of over some of those other teams which are good, right? But they don't have a chip to show for it just yet, right? Like
Right.
the Warriors have already won titles in the past, so they're gonna obviously have, like a decent amount of belief and confidence in them, as people should, because they've, won before, and they still have a talented roster, right? The Lakers, right? LeBron and AD have won before, so people know that that team is going to be able to contend. The Suns, even though as a group together they haven't won, you do have Durant, who has, won a title before, and you have, again, some other guys behind them that are good, right? And again, they're looked at as like, another one of those top teams.
Right.
So, like, that's kind of the interesting thing is like, for most people, is it more so like Denver and then, the next tier? Or like those other teams that are a little below Denver, are they in the same tier? That's kind of like,
I think they're
that's kind
below
of like, I
Denver.
guess,
I
yeah,
think that's just the way it's gonna have to be because I don't think
yeah, I
any
think,
team has the offensive um efficiency that I think Denver has, and also the chemistry that they have as well. Like it's just unmatched. I think.
yeah, so that's the main thing. But, um, regardless, like like I said, it's definitely a much better roster than last year, for sure, right? And I think
Yep.
I still would say it's probably an upgrade over the one at the deadline, because again, like it's just, again, like it just kind of is a question of like, again, like when I mentioned the thing with if you swap Chris Paul with Jordan Poole, right? If you swap like a D'Lo with Gabe Vincent, or not D'Lo, but you know what I mean. Like remember, like in the last game of the series, right? They benched D'Lo for Schroeder, and so
Hmm.
it's like if you swap Vincent and Schroeder. Now Schroeder was pretty decent for them at times in the playoffs. But again, offensively he is an upgrade. And then it's like, if you replace Torian Prince with one of the other guys, who was struggling, right? Like Malik Beasley was supposed to be a guy that was going to help them, and then, he, didn't help them really in the playoffs. And that's kind
Right.
of the thing, is that you hope you don't have as many guys that kind of just, disappear as the series go on, because that's going to happen with some players, especially guys that are more like role players, just because role players are more series specific, right? Like you don't expect role players to be able to play really well and match up really well against every team. That's kind of what the superstars are there for.
Right.
Um, right, because the guys who aren't superstars, there's just going to be certain series where like you're probably just not going to play them as much, right? Like you don't need Vanderbilt, in a series where there's not like a guy that plays a lot of one-on-one basketball, right? Like if you need to put him on like a Luca or like a Booker slash Durant, or somebody like that, right? Like that's fine, but you don't need him like against Steph Curry because he doesn't play on the ball as much,
Right.
those guys, right? So like it just kind of depends. But again, like when you're a role player, that's kind of what happens.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's yeah. So the main thing, like I said, I'm looking for that backup big, outside of Jackson Hayes, and can is there a way for them to get an upgrade from D'Angelo Russell? And if not, like can Gabe Vincent kind of just hold it down, as a potential backup or a guy that closes, instead of D'Lo if he doesn't play well?
Right.
Those are kind of the question marks for them right now. In
Same
addition
for
to like
me.
what we mentioned, yeah, in addition to what we mentioned, like can their stars be healthy? Which you have to factor that in with every team, but you have to factor that with them as well because they are guys that do miss time, like we mentioned
Yeah.
with the Suns guy.
Yeah. They built
Um,
that reputation. So,
right. So now that we've kind of gone over the Lakers roster. Now we're just gonna again get into more rumors and news.
did you want to grade
Again.
them?
Oh shoot, yeah. So cut
Yeah.
that part
You're
out.
good. No, it's fine. We can grade them.
Yeah. Yeah. So going, now that we've covered, the roster, I guess like, again, like we can kind of like we did for the Warriors. I think we gave them like, I think you gave them like a B plus, and I
I
think
think
I
I gave
said
them
like,
a B plus.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So like we basically gave them almost the same grade. We
Mm-hmm.
basically gave them a B.
Yeah. They're
Um,
it's in the
you know,
same tier.
yeah, exactly. So for the Lakers, what grade do you give them? I guess I'll let you kind of go off and
Okay.
kind of start us off. What grade would you give them for the off season? I guess
Yeah.
in terms of like what they did.
I give them an A. And,
Mhm.
I feel like people probably would disagree with that immensely. But, for me, I think bringing back D'Lo and the deal that they did was amazing. That's a steal, in my opinion. That's cheap for him. And then also bringing Gabe Vincent in, they just stole him from Miami pretty much. Like we said, that was on nobody's radar at all. We thought they were going to bring back Schroeder, but they got Gabe Vincent, and that's definitely an upgrade over Schroeder. So they upgraded there at the backup guard position. Then bringing back AR, that was a great move as well because there were rumblings, that he was getting a big contract from, I think it was either Houston or San Antonio or some other weird teams. Like, I thought that was BS and just leverage, but, he
Yeah,
came back.
we never thought he was going to get a max.
Exactly. So he came back, got some money too, obviously. And that's somebody that they definitely should want to, keep around for, the long run. He seems like he's developing into a really good player for sure. Um, and then also, some of the minimum signings I thought were pretty good. They also got rid of Troy Brown. I thought he was kind of dead weight at that point on the roster. So, and that's not like an attack on him, but I'm just saying, to bring in guys who are going to do more than him, I think is a good idea. Replacing
Right.
basically Troy Brown minutes with, say, like Cam Reddish minutes. I think that's, better. And then obviously their draft pick, Hutch Scafino, I think that's how you say it. I think
Yeah.
he's also going to be, a really good player down the line. I'm not sure how he's going to do this season. I think he's going to get, ample opportunity and some decent minutes, especially early in the season. I think they can risk that for sure. And he's a big guard, so I think that was a great pickup for them as well. Um, and my only worry, like the only reason I didn't give them an A plus, is really that big man position. I think but I can't really hold that against them because the market is so bad right now, and they didn't have a huge chunk of money to give away.
No.
Without, yeah, especially considering they had to bring a few key pieces back. Oh, and Rui too. Bringing back Rui was definitely a big deal. Huge Rui fan here. Obviously, I'm a Wizards fan. So, I want to see him win regardless. So bringing him back, and I think, he's going to continue to take leaps in his game for sure. I think, the next leap that we'll probably see his 3-point percentage rise, and also his defense will definitely get better for sure. Because everything else I think is solid with his game. Obviously he's not like a ball handler, so we won't be seeing anything crazy like that. But yeah, overall I think I give them an A just because of what they were able to bring back, especially on a budget, and also, acquire. I think, and they got better. Simple as that. They got better than last year. So that's an automatic improvement. And it's not like with the Warriors where the Warriors got better, but it doesn't necessarily change, what we really think of them. I think this changes what people think of the Lakers compared to last season. Like you said, we thought they were going to be a play-in team. Majority of the world thought they were going to be a play-in team last year with the Russ thing. Ended up being a freaking playoff or play-in team, excuse me. And now I think they're going to be, like you said, top 3 seed for sure. Um, so yeah, that's my grade for them.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm kind of with you. Like I said, I'm probably leaning more into like the A minus,
Okay.
B plus range. Like you said, kind of the same for the same reasons. Like as I need to see like what they do with that big man spot.
Right.
Um, but like you said, I think they pretty much did about as decent of an offseason like as you could do. Given the circumstances. Because again, I never expected them to like jettison a bunch of those guys.
Yeah.
Like for a Kyrie or anything.
No,
I
it
didn't
wasn't gonna
expect
happen.
that. And after multiple off seasons where they, drastically altered the roster, I think that yeah, this is a pretty solid off season where and a pretty normal one, just in general, right? Normal for them is a little bit different, but
Right.
still, because again, like you, for the most part, ran back a team, that was pretty good, and then just added, and swapped out other pieces to it, which
Right.
is typically what you do, when you have a team that's trying to contend. Because again, like you said, they brought back the main group of guys, right? They brought back D'Lo, they brought back Reeves, brought back Rui, um, and then again, then after that, then they swapped out a couple other guys, right? Swapped out, Schroeder, brought in Gabe Vincent,
Upgrade.
swapped out, yeah, exactly, swapped out, like Alani Walker and brought in Torian Prince. Um, and again, like, I like you said, the gamble signings, for, in terms of Reddish and Hayes, in terms of like there's potential upside there. It just kind of depends on, what they do in terms of how they're going to be used and, just how good are they actually going to be, in terms of contributing, again, because the team that they're on right now is you got much higher expectations, right? Like you're playing in Los Angeles, and some guys sometimes don't really respond well to that.
Yeah.
And you're on a team in addition to like the market. You're also just on a team that has higher expectations, right? Like the when Cam Reddish was in Atlanta, that team never really had super high expectations.
Right.
They while he was there, they were never looked at as like a championship contender.
Right.
Um, and then when Jackson Hayes was in New Orleans, right, they weren't really looked at that during his time there either, right? People were hoping that they'd be better last year, right?
Yeah,
Because they got
absolutely.
off to that really good start. But even then, I don't feel like people looked at them as like a possible championship team.
No.
More so like a team like what happened with Memphis 2 seasons
Just
ago,
a
where
good
they took
team.
the leap. Yeah, exactly. Where they took the leap from being, a young, inexperienced, like, play-in team to, like more of a good playoff team.
Right.
Um, so that's the thing with them. But like you said, I overall liked what they did. I just need to see what they do from that, big man perspective, because again, like that can kind of, and again, like with the 14th roster spot, like, like usually like it doesn't matter all that much. It's just a conversation just because we know what the whole, what the biggest hole on the roster is, for the most part. And we know as of right now which guys are available. But
Right.
like you said, I'm with you. I think they had a pretty solid offseason. Like I said, maybe I'm just a little bit harsher on it, but still wouldn't really call it harsh because it's
Yeah.
again B plus A minus. That's a
Yeah.
good grade. So
Yeah. I
that's
think
kind of
they
how
did
I
great.
yeah exactly. So that's kind of how I look at that. And again, like they have the flexibility to potentially make some other moves regardless. Then you look at the coaching, right? Darvin Ham going into his second year, right? Did like kind of grew over the course of the season. Obviously didn't do great, against Denver, but I thought overall, right, like I think he still did in the playoffs a decent job for a rookie head coach,
Yeah.
especially considering again, like, it's very difficult, I think, to have a team, have a roster of guys that you've only had for like a few months, like a couple months basically, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of figure out, and he's kind of like figuring out on the fly, what he has and what he can and can't do. So he should, I think, also kind of grow, as a second year head coach as well, right? Because it started kind of rough, but it also wasn't a very good roster, so it's like, now that he has a good roster, now we kind of get to see like, like it, his ability to grow, as a head coach. So I think that's kind of the interesting aspect of it as well.
Yeah, I agree. That's
Yeah.
a huge factor, especially coaching. Like, Darvinham. I think I'm on his side. I'm rooting for him. I know a lot of people think he's a straight up imbecile, but I don't think so at all. I think he does have
I
a
think he
good
got the
coaching mind. Exactly, and I think he
yeah.
grew, and he was definitely a honestly, he was definitely a project coach. Honest, and that's kind of like weird to say, I know, but you have to give him some slack. You have to cut him some slack because he was a rookie head coach, and to be a rookie and go to the Western Conference Finals, I think is a pretty big accomplishment. Obviously, you have LeBron and Anthony Davis, but to turn that season around and see the adjustments that he did make in some of the series, I was like, he has potential to be a coach that sticks around.
Right. And it's like, now that they're in that contender spot, now, when we talk about like, when we mentioned the Bucks thing as like, like whether or not it was a failure, now that the Lakers have a better roster, now they're, now they're better able to be judged, by how they succeed, come playoff time. Because
Right.
again, like regular season wise, got to get to the playoffs, right? But what matters more for them is the playoffs because you have two stars, that are, when they're on their game, right? They're both easily, top 10 players.
Yes.
So it's just like, now it kind of you kind of wonder like, what is it going to look like come playoff time? That's the main thing cuz again, like it's there's different ladders and different tiers, right? Cuz it's like it's one thing to go from, a play-in team, to now a team that's, going to be a factor in the playoffs. But then it's like, can you build a team that can go from that point to a championship team? And even though like there's not quite as many like tiers to go up, right? That's probably harder because again, it's very difficult to win a championship, in the NBA. But, again, like I mentioned with the Suns, right? The Lakers now are going to be judged by whether or not they win the title, just because now we know they have the talent to be able to contend.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So now, after, now that we've kind of wrapped up our talk about the Lakers, now we're just going to go into, the typical news and rumor stuff. Obviously, today officially, well, obviously, if you're watching it, it's Monday, right? But we're recording on Sunday. The NBA approved the sale of the Charlotte Hornets. Only one dissenting vote, James Dolan of the Knicks. Don't really know what that was about.
I mean,
But regardless,
he's a cuckoo owner. He's probably one of the worst in the league, honestly.
yeah. But either way, one of the other worst owners is now gone, is now gone. In Michael Jordan. So we, obviously we know the story of the Charlotte Hornets. Under his tenure, right? Not a very good team. A lot of years of mediocrity or worse.
Yeah.
A lot of rough options in terms of draft picks. A lot of real missed opportunities. Like and again, like we know a lot of them, right? Like Frank Kaminsky.
Oh
Um,
gosh.
yeah, exactly. Choosing Miles Bridges over Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. Again, Bridges not a
That's
bad
rough,
player, but
bro.
Gilgeous-Alexander is a lot better. Yeah, like we know it at this point, right? Michael Kidd Gilchrist.
I was
Um,
waiting for it.
yeah, I know. I mean, and again, he was good in college, right? But again,
Sure.
that was a missed opportunity. And there were a few other years, right, where like the draft pick wasn't as high, so you just kind of like, like you were kind of like stuck with the not best option. But again, like other guys, Cody Zeller, Noah Vonleh, right? Just a lot of guys that just didn't really pan out. LaMelo Ball, we'll see. Because obviously, he's had a decent start to his career. I still think of like, like people mention him versus Tyrese Halliburton. I feel like right now Halliburton's eclipsed Ball just because we've seen him, like on a like, contribute to winning basketball a little bit more.
Right.
But in fairness to LaMelo
Lamelo's
at the
more
same
exciting though.
yeah, but in fairness to LaMelo, there's also been a little bit more turmoil with that Hornets roster, right? Because Bridges was gone, for all of last year. And then they've had a ton of injuries as well, including to himself.
Yeah.
Um,
Book night hadn't panned out either.
yeah, exactly. So that's the thing. So we'll see, what this new ownership can do. In terms of like, again, it's gonna be interesting. Are they gonna make any splashes, right? Are they gonna hire different people? We'll have to see.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree. It's been rough for them, and that's all I
yeah,
can really say because we've talked about
right.
Charlotte before. We know they can be
Yeah,
better, and new ownership is definitely something that can impact the
yeah,
franchise. And yeah,
yeah.
I think it's great.
Biombo. Yeah.
Yeah, yuck.
Yeah, like yeah, exactly. Um, Steph talks NBA expansion, so the teams he or the cities he mentioned that he would be interested to see another NBA team: Seattle, Nashville, and Vegas. Obviously, Seattle and Vegas have kind of been at the forefront, I think, for the in
Hmm.
most people's minds, for expansion teams. Not so much Nashville. I feel like I've heard that a little more so for women's
Yeah,
basketball, like the WNBA, in
right.
terms of a potential
Because they
expansion.
already have Memphis, Tennessee, so
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because you already have Memphis. Yeah, so I think that's the rationale for it.
I
But
would
it
like
would
to
be
see like a
interesting.
Kentucky team or something like that. I think that would be better. I mean, obviously that's a very small market, but in terms of like location, I feel like you need one west, one east, but I don't know. I could be wrong.
Yeah, because that's the thing. Like once you add in the teams, then you have to move other teams around. Like again, if a new team comes in, right, then that probably moves like Memphis or New Orleans east,
Right.
which should happen because again, like no one would ever call Memphis, Tennessee. the West Coast or New
No,
Orleans
and
and
we've talked
Louisiana.
about that multiple
Yeah,
times.
exactly. If your
It's
state is
stupid.
anywhere close to my state, like you're not West
Right.
Coast at all.
And it's like
So,
parts of Memphis like go to the Midwest or parts of Tennessee go to the Midwest, but like
right.
that doesn't mean you're the West Coast automatically. Like that's not how
Yeah,
geography works.
yeah, exactly. But regardless, it was interesting because, like I said, I haven't heard Nashville as an NBA
Me
market,
neither.
more so as a WNBA market. Because, like you said, you already have Memphis with the Grizzlies, and like, do you really need two Tennessee NBA
No,
teams? Nashville I know is a big market.
huge
For
market,
a lot of
great city.
things. Yeah, exactly. But I don't know. It was just an interesting comment.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, in terms that there do need to be, expansions in terms of teams, but I want to see a state and a city, get a team that hasn't that doesn't have an NBA team basically is what I'm trying to say. But it's hard because
Let's
a lot of those states are like,
yeah,
tiny or they're just small
yeah.
market squads or small
Let's
market
put a team
cities.
in Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Yeah, like who's gonna really trek out to Wyoming?
It's the
Uh,
least populated state, I think.
yeah,
So
like and then like other states like Vermont. I don't know.
yeah,
That's just that's hard. Like
Alaska.
yeah, and then like what? I don't. Delaware doesn't have one. I know they have a G League affiliate there, but
Yeah,
who really cares though?
yeah, exactly. Next up, Kemba Walker, not certain about NBA return. Obviously, if you hadn't heard, he signed with the team in France. Um, Monaco basically.
Yeah,
I think that's the name of the team, and it's I think in a French basketball league.
right.
So and obviously he was a guy, for a while was a really good NBA player. Obviously we know what happened with injuries. He went to Boston, and I think he played in that All Star weekend. And like I think he was hurt and he played through an injury, and then like kind of exacerbated it, and then after that he just was not the same.
Yeah,
Which sucks because again he's a guy that I think is very well liked by a lot of people. And he was a really good player, but it is kind of weird how we're kind of seeing, some of these guys that were longtime NBA mainstays,
we grew up
now
with
they're
him.
going yeah, now they're going yeah, exactly. Now they're going overseas like him.
Dwight,
Dwight Howard was in what was it, Taiwan
Taiwan.
last year. Eric Bledsoe I think played in China.
Yep.
So just kind of an interesting thing, but yeah, just is he gonna be back in the NBA? I don't probably not.
No,
Maybe, but
it's
it's
too
just
late.
again the longer you're out, the harder it is to get back in. So
Hmm.
that's kind of the thing. And again, like for him, it sucks because the injuries. Had he not gotten hurt, he probably still would be playing. Would he be the same player as he was, 4 or 5 years ago? Maybe, maybe not.
Mm,
But yeah, but regardless, it just
yeah.
it's just kind of a reminder that injuries just always just really kind of stink.
Right. I get you. And then like, with him, he's an iconic player too, in my opinion. He had multiple plays in college, definitely in the NBA where you're like, holy crap, like this guy's definitely, up there in terms of ball handling and the shot making ability. But, it's sad to see, but at the same time, overseas leagues are no joke. Those guys will go over there and put up monster like Wilt Chamberlain numbers. And then, that grows their own fan base over there. They get a whole new they reach a whole new demographic and they become stars over there. So it's not all bad. It's just a
Right.
transition to a different league. Simple as that.
Yeah. Um, Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype reports that, multiple teams are expected to be interested in Rudy Gay. So obviously, if you didn't hear, right, he was traded to Oklahoma City after being traded to Atlanta in that John Collins trade. And then he was traded to Oklahoma City, and then they waived him. He's gonna be 37 next month. 5 points, 3 rebounds a game last year, shot 38% from the field, which is our career lows. I mean, I'm a little bit surprised because I just don't feel like he's like that impactful of a player anymore.
Right.
Um, but I guess I could see some teams be interested in terms of like wanting a veteran. He mentioned Golden State, Dallas, Chicago, New Orleans, and the Lakers. Um, I don't want him personally as an LA fan, and it has nothing to do with him. Again, I just like I said, I just
There's
we
better
had a
out
year,
there.
yeah, we had a year where we had a lot of older players that were on the team, and spoiler alert, it wasn't good.
Right.
So Golden State, I mean, I guess they'd probably use him as like a small ball big man, but I mean, I don't know. Like,
He's
I
not
just
Jeff
don't feel like
Green
that.
though. Like I don't know.
Yeah,
It's weird to me. I don't like
I don't
any of the
know.
teams.
And I guess there's potential for him to look better, like on a better team, but I don't know. Like, I just I feel like he should not be expected to be a guy that like should be playing a big role because I
No,
just feel like now he's an older player.
it's just how
Um,
it goes.
yeah, again, he's gonna be 37 next month, and I mean, like
Right.
most guys that are at that age, like are just not gonna be as impactful. I mean, like
Right.
there's again, like we know LeBron 38, 39, right? But again, that's a very rare case. He's basically like the only one. So I
Right.
mean, I don't know, but again, he is a veteran, so it doesn't shock me that there are teams interested in
And he had
him.
a great
But like,
career.
yeah. Um, and then after that, according to Chris Haynes, Heat annoyed by the Dame trade talks in the sense of like, I guess they're not happy in terms of like feeling like Portland hasn't communicated well.
No surprise
In
there.
regards, yeah, in regards to what they want. I don't know. I mean, like, I think at this point everybody knows what Portland wants.
Yeah.
We're not just gonna give you Damian Lillard for
Nothing.
fries and a shake. We're gonna
Exactly.
yeah, exactly. We want you to give whatever your best offer is, whatever that can be. If you can do that, you can get Dame, but you're not gonna get him with just like a couple picks and Tyler Hero. So
Yeah,
it's
like
up to
they're
Miami, I
literally
think.
trying to give them like the number two with cheese. It's not gonna work. You need
Yeah,
like something else. Like it's
right,
I don't know. It's dumb.
exactly. Like it's up to Miami, I think, at this point to figure out, how are they gonna be able to put together the best
They
offer
need
for
to get
Lillard.
that third team involved. I'm telling you.
Yeah, yeah, because that's the thing. Because we still haven't heard any other teams really having a super high level of interest in Lillard. So if it really only really is Miami, then either Portland's waiting and hoping for another team to kind of spring up, or Miami's just again, you're gonna have to figure out a way to get it done. Because at this point we're
Yeah,
kind of stuck in limbo. This offseason right now, because those are kind of the big moves that we're waiting for. A potential Lillard trade, and
Harden.
maybe Harden, depending on
Yeah.
what happens.
And good luck, because these guys will put you on a roller coaster ride.
Yeah. Um, Spurs, according to SNY, right? According to them, uh, Evan Fournier has drawn trade interest from the Spurs, right? So Ian Begley basically, we already know. It sounds like Fournier. It seems like he's even publicly said, he kind of wants to play elsewhere. Um, I think he mentioned that he was, and I think yeah, I think he even mentioned himself like he'd be interested in playing for the Spurs, because of the pop factor. And I guess also he would probably get minutes, which he's not going to get in New York. I
No,
mean, like I get it. Um, I think the Knicks will try to trade him just because again, like he's a salary that's taking up space on the roster, and if he's not going to play, then there's no real need to keep him
move on
around
from
because
him.
he's at a level where he can still play for a team. But if you're the Knicks and you're not going to play him at all, which I understand because they have other guards that are probably better options, right? Like you got, obviously you have at the guard spot, right? Brunson, quickly, um, Quentin Grimes, and so like you have other options,
Those
at
three
that.
are all better than him. FYI.
Yeah, exactly. So you have other options that are probably better. So it's like that's my guess is that like, maybe he gets traded to the Spurs. I guess it's like what would the Spurs be giving up, right? Cuz like, both of those teams now don't, they're not it's not like the Spurs now are an over the cap team where they can just take on a player and not really give anything back. Like I
Right.
think they have to give stuff back now. So and I just don't know contract wise. Maybe they have like one of those other random veterans on the roster, like a Cameron Payne or somebody like that. But I
Hmm.
think Fournier makes a decent chunk of change. So I don't think you can just trade him and like only give up like, an $8 million contract if I'm
Right.
not mistaken.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So is there like another team that you're thinking like, you'd like to see Fournier go to, or not like to see, but like more so like a better fit,
I mean, I
where he'll
like
play?
the San Antonio one because
Yep.
I like the French to
Yeah.
French connection. I believe Fournier's French.
Yeah. Yep.
And I do like
Never.
him being with Wemby. That would be kind of cool. I
Yeah.
mean, just be like an Easter egg kind of thing, I guess.
Right.
Popovich is a great coach, obviously, and I feel like he has to go to a bad team or a team that's not going to perform that great.
Hmm.
If he wants to
If
really
he
get
wants to play.
minutes, exactly.
Yeah.
So he's going to have to end up going to a sorry team. Um, and
Yeah.
that is what it is. That's just the reality. When you're at that age and at the level that he's at, you're probably not going to be on a championship kind of squad and also play. So he does have to go to a team that's either growing or is going to ultimately be bad. So I guess, it'd be pretty much all the bad teams. I wouldn't mind him like, being in Detroit, somewhere like that. I don't know. I don't think Houston has enough money probably, but I don't know.
No.
So it'd probably be like San Antonio or Detroit.
Yeah.
But he probably wouldn't
Yeah.
even play in Detroit because they have so many young guys now. So probably San Antonio.
Yeah, just don't Google his name.
Yeah, that's his nickname. Don't Google it. Literally, don't.
Yeah. And then last but not least, according to Woj, Io DeSunmu, right, guard for the Bulls, gets a 3-year, $21 million deal to stay in Chicago. I think our expectation was that he was going to re-sign with Chicago. He was a restricted free agent. Usually, restricted free agents stay with their own teams. I'm surprised it took this long. Um, just because I would have assumed he would have been like more of a priority-ish type of signing just to keep themselves flexible in case they, decide to trade somebody else or
Right.
just again because he's a talented young player. And again, you need, with Lonzo being out, you need, these other guards to probably step up. They re-signed Kobe White as well. Um, Caruso's still on the roster. So you have a number of guards that you're probably gonna have to kind of like, figure out a way to like make up for the Lonzo minutes, right? Because
Right.
we already know he's gonna be out, for all of next season, which, again, that sucks. But we know, right? We know going into the season he's gonna be out. Um, One thing that is kind of intriguing about it is, we know the Bulls have that $10 million player or disabled player exception, that they're getting from the Lonzo Ball contract, because he's going to be out for the season. But it is interesting because, like, um, I think they're pretty close to that first luxury tax tier, if I'm not mistaken. So, and we know the Bulls historically don't really like to spend, a ton of money.
Right.
So I guess, the question for me is like, I'm assuming they're not going to use all of the disabled player exception, but like, how much of it are they going to use? Because, like I said, they're pretty close. I think there may be only like a few million within a few million of it, um, right now. Because again, they've re-signed most of their other guys. Because there had been a rumor, about Christian Wood maybe going to Chicago, but how much more money is he going to get, than he would get elsewhere? Just because again, like we know the Bulls are not a team that are going to spend a ton, and they're not going to spend a ton anyways for this roster because this roster we know is not going to be that great.
Yeah.
So just kind of interesting. But again, he's a guy. He's been a guard that's played pretty well for them. He had that stretch. I think towards the end of the season, like the last few months, right, where he played pretty well. Where he was like 11 and 5 a game, and shot pretty well from the field and from three. So again, he's got an opportunity with Lonzo out, to get more minutes and get more opportunities.
Yeah.
And if he continues to get better, that could be a steal of a contract going forward. It just kind of depends on how good he's going to be.
Right.
But 7 million a year, for a young guard, that's
I like it.
pretty manageable. I think. I think that's really good. Because
It's a
again, he
good
wasn't
move.
going to get it done, and to get a 3-year, that's pretty solid.
Yeah, it's a rare W from Chicago recently.
Yeah, and he's a second round pick. Which is again like that's why he's not getting like a 4 or 5 year,
Exactly.
deal just because I think with the second round picks they just it's different for them. And there's a new rule in the CBA now where I don't think you have to like in the past you had to use like some of your mid level I think in order to sign the second round picks to like longer term deals. Like that's why like say for the Lakers, right, guys like Austin Reeves, THT, Max Christie, those guys were given 2-year deals. Um, for like, so like they would hit free agency earlier. And, in a way, like, it can be an advantage for the players because that allows them to get paid earlier, right? Like Austin Reeves is getting paid basically a year earlier, than everybody in his draft class,
Right.
for the most part. Same with like THT, right? Like THT, if he had gotten paid after year three, right, he wouldn't have gotten that same contract, because in year three he didn't really take that much of a leap forward. In some ways, he took
Exactly.
a step back.
Oh, for sure.
But yeah, but regardless, now with the new CBA, you're able, I think, to easier, well, not to easier, yeah, it's a lot easier now, I think, to give those guys longer term deals, like an Io DeSumo, which is good
Yeah.
because again, like ideally, you want to find a way to keep your young players, especially if they hit.
Yeah, and I think this is a perfect move for them. And like I said at the beginning when you were talking about it, it's a rare W for Chicago because they've been taking a lot of L's recently, and some of them are out of their
Yeah,
control.
yeah,
Specifically Lonzo, but other ones are in their control, like Vucevic and other guys that we're not too high on anymore. So I think
yeah,
this is a great move for them. Bring him
right,
back on a
yeah,
budget. It's a steal.
yeah. For a brief moment, they will be known as the Windy City as opposed to the Lindy City.
Exactly. They're actually
Yeah,
taking W's. We'll see how long it
yeah,
lasts though. No hate to
yeah,
Chicago. If you're a Chicago fan, we love you. But goodness
yes.
gracious.
Yes. So that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, obviously we talked about, the Lakers, off season, and their roster. as well as the other news and rumors going around the league. Because again, like at this point, nothing's really happening right now. Because we're at that point in the NBA where summer league is over, right? Obviously, all the other stuff is over, like the draft and everything else. So we're kind of like at a slow point where the talk for the NBA is kind of dying down. As
Yeah.
some of the other sports are taking more of the shine away.
Yes.
Um, so like right, so but it gives us an opportunity, again to talk about these teams. And again, some of these teams will change, right? Whether or not it's at the deadline or there are a couple of teams, right, that may look different, by training camp or the start of the season. Um, but obviously, like you mentioned, and we're gonna cover it, we're gonna talk about it. So,
Yeah.
again, we appreciate all the support. Like I mentioned, and like he mentioned, if you haven't seen our Vegas experience, the vlog, obviously it's gonna be around.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can go in and check it. In addition, like I mentioned, to the live action or in person
Yeah.
episode that we did in Vegas. So again, thanks yeah, exactly. Don't forget to like and comment and subscribe. Comment your thoughts about what you think the Lakers did this offseason, whether or not you agree or disagree with our takes. So thanks for listening. Hopefully you had a great weekend, and we'll see you at the end of this week.